November 18, 1944, 06:30 hours, the Hurtgen Forest, Germany. Sergeant James "Jimmy" McKenna crouches behind his M10 tank destroyer, watching 3 German pillboxes through the morning fog. His breath forms clouds in the freezing air. Behind those concrete walls 3 feet thick, German machine gunners wait, MG-42s, 1,700 rounds per minute. Hitler's buzzsaw 3 pillboxes, mutually supporting, interlocking fields of fire. Every approach covered, standard Siegfried line construction. McKenna's already lost 2 men trying to take them the approved way. The book says you suppress with direct fire. Send infantry around the flanks, use smoke and white phosphorus, blow the embrasures with TNT. Standard procedure, 3 hours minimum per pillbox, but McKenna doesn't have 3 hours. He doesn't even have one. At 0700, the rest of his company attacks uphill. Without suppressing these 3 pillboxes, it's a death sentence. His men, the ones still alive, are counting on him. So he's about to do something the field artillery manual calls ricochet fire, something his training officer specifically warned him never to attempt. Too unpredictable, they said, too dangerous, too likely to fail spectacularly and waste precious ammunition. But McKenna sees something his commanders don't. An angle, a geometry problem written in mud, concrete, and morning frost. 1 shot, he thinks, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. He climbs back into the turret of his M10 Wolverine. His gunner, Corporal Danny Rodriguez, looks at him. Load high explosive, McKenna says. Delay fuse. Rodriguez's eyes widen. Sarge, delay fuse? That's for just do it. What happens in the next 90 seconds will either save 37 American lives or end McKenna's career, if he lives long enough to have a career. To understand what McKenna's about to attempt, you need to understand 3 things: the Siegfried line, the pillbox problem, and a firing technique that senior officers wished didn't exist. The Siegfried line, the Germans called it the West Wall, stretched over 390 miles along Germany's western frontier. More than 18,000 bunkers, more than 18,000 concrete fortifications designed to stop armies. But here's what Allied propaganda didn't tell you in late 1944. The Siegfried line was supposed to be obsolete. Intelligence said most pillboxes had been stripped for parts. Their weapons moved west to the Atlantic Wall. Intelligence said German defenders were old men and boys, poorly trained, poorly equipped. Intelligence was catastrophically wrong. When the U.S. First Army hit the Siegfried line in September 1944, they discovered something terrifying. Yes, the bunkers were old. Yes, the defenders were often inexperienced. But concrete doesn't care about experience. 3 feet of reinforced concrete stops everything you can throw at it. Artillery bombardment? The pillboxes were designed to withstand 500-pound bombs. They'd emerge from barrages with nothing more than chipped paint. Tank shells? The embrasures, the firing slits, were barely 18 inches wide. Hitting them at combat range was like shooting the eye of a needle from a moving horse while someone shoots back. The mathematics were brutal. Standard U.S. Army doctrine for taking a Siegfried line pillbox required 16 to 18 men working as an assault team. First, you needed tanks or tank destroyers to suppress the embrasures, keeping the German gunners' heads down. Then, small assault groups would maneuver to the blind spots behind the structure. If the defenders didn't surrender, and they rarely did, not at first, you'd use bazookas against the steel doors. White phosphorus grenades down the air shafts. If that failed, flamethrowers. If that failed, engineers would place 500-pound demolition charges. Time required, 2 to 4 hours per pillbox. Casualties, typically 3 to 8 men per pillbox. And here's the thing that made the Hurtgen Forest hell on earth. The pillboxes were mutually supporting. They covered each other. You couldn't attack one without exposing yourself to crossfire from 2 others. It was a 3-dimensional chess problem where the pieces shot back. In the dense forest, where trees grew so thick that tanks couldn't maneuver, where visibility dropped to 30 yards, the pillboxes became death traps for American forces. Between September and December 1944, the Hurtgen Forest would claim over 33,000 American casualties, the highest casualty rate per square mile in the entire European theater. But there was another way. A technique that existed in the field manuals but was almost never used. Ricochet fire. The concept dated back to the 18th century. The Marquis de Vauban first perfected it at the Siege of Philipsburg in 1688. The idea was simple. Instead of trying to lob a shell over fortress walls or punch directly through them, you fired at a low angle with reduced charge. The shell would skip across the ground like a stone on water, bouncing over parapets and ricocheting inside the fortification. By World War II, ricochet fire had evolved. Field Artillery Field Manual FM 640, Section 122 covered it specifically. You'd load a high-explosive shell with a delay fuse, designed to penetrate before detonating. Then you'd aim not at the target but at the ground in front of it. At precisely the right angle, between 18 and 20 degrees, the shell would bounce. The delay fuse would prevent premature detonation on first impact. The shell would skip forward in a flat trajectory, penetrating targets that direct fire couldn't touch. In theory. In practice, ricochet fire required perfect conditions. Frozen ground worked best. Soft earth absorbed the impact. You needed the exact right angle. Too steep and the shell buried itself, too shallow and it skipped over the target. Wind, humidity, temperature, all factors. Get one variable wrong and you've wasted a shell. Worse, you've given away your position. That's why training officers discouraged it. In the field, under combat conditions, with imperfect intelligence and enemy fire, the technique was considered too unreliable. The official position, use only when absolutely necessary, but McKenna had studied the geometry. 3 pillboxes arranged in a rough triangle, each about 40 yards from the next, elevated slightly on a ridgeline, ground frozen solid from 3 nights of sub-freezing temperatures, and most importantly, a clear line of sight along their front edge, 1 shell. Delay fuse. Correct angle. He'd done the math in his head 5 times. The math worked. The math said it was possible. The math didn't account for luck. McKenna's journey to this moment began 3 months earlier, August 1944, the Falaise Pocket in France. He wasn't supposed to be a tank destroyer commander. McKenna had enlisted in 1942 as an artillery observer, the guy who calls in fire missions, who does trigonometry in his head while people shoot at him. He'd been good at it. Really good. His battery commander said McKenna could calculate firing solutions faster than most guys could work a slide rule. But the Normandy campaign chewed through tank destroyer crews at an unsustainable rate. The M10, Wolverine, officially the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, was an open-topped vehicle built on a Sherman chassis. Armor protection was minimal by design. Tank destroyers weren't meant to brawl with enemy tanks. They were meant to move fast, hit hard, vanish before the enemy could respond. That was the doctrine. Reality in the hedgerows of Normandy was different. Reality was German 88s shooting from camouflaged positions. Reality was Panzerfausts in every basement. Reality was that open top that made every mortar burst potentially lethal. McKenna transferred to tank destroyers in August after his M10 crew took a direct hit from a Panzer IV. He wasn't the senior man. He was barely qualified. But he was alive and he could do math, and the Army needed bodies more than it needed perfect credentials. His gunner, Corporal Danny Rodriguez, was 20 years old. Corpus Christi, Texas. Before the war, he'd worked in his father's auto shop. Give Rodriguez anything mechanical in 30 minutes, he'd have it running better than factory spec. The M10's 3-inch M7 gun, officially capable of hitting targets at 1,000 yards, Rodriguez could stretch to 1,400 on a good day. His loader, Private First Class William Billy Chen, was the youngest of the crew at 19. San Francisco, son of Chinese immigrants, joined up 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Chen could load, arm, and fire 3 rounds in 20 seconds. The manual said 30 seconds was acceptable. Chen made the manual look lazy. His driver, Private Eugene Gino Kowalski, 22, Detroit, knew every sound the M10's twin General Motors 6-71 diesel engines made. Could diagnose problems by ear in the middle of a firefight. Had kept their vehicle running through conditions that made other crews abandon their destroyers. And his assistant driver, bow gunner, Private Marcus Johnson, 21, Birmingham, Alabama. The only black man in a predominantly white unit, transferred from a quartermaster company when the Army finally started integrating combat units in desperate need of replacements. Johnson had proven himself 3 times over in combat, but still caught hell from soldiers who couldn't see past skin color. McKenna shut that down hard the first time he witnessed it. In his crew, you pulled your weight or you got out. Simple as that. They'd been together for 3 months. That made them veterans. In tank destroyer terms, 3 months might as well be 3 years. They'd entered the Hurtgen Forest on November 2, 1944, as part of the 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 28th Infantry Division. Nobody told them they were walking into a meat grinder. The first 2 weeks were manageable. Long-range fire support, covering infantry advances, standard procedure. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, the situation deteriorated. Trees so thick that American artillery couldn't range properly, mud so deep that vehicles bogged down, German artillery so precise that you knew they'd pre-registered every crossroads, every clearing, every place an American tank might pause. And the pillboxes. They were everywhere. Hidden by camouflage, by dense underbrush, by 7 years of forest growth. You wouldn't know one was there until the MG-42 opened up. By then, men were dying. November 16th, they lost their first man. Private Johnson took shrapnel from a mortar burst while scouting a position. 19 pieces of hot metal, none bigger than a dime. 2 punctured his lung. He died before the medic reached him, drowning in his own blood, trying to say something nobody could understand through the fluid filling his throat. They replaced him with Private Theodore Teddy Walsh, fresh from the States. 19 years old. 3 weeks of combat training. Walsh didn't last 36 hours. Direct hit from a Panzerfaust on November 18th during a probe toward the pillbox line. The rocket-propelled grenade punched through the thin armor, detonated inside the crew compartment. Walsh didn't die instantly. It took 4 minutes. McKenna held his hand the whole time, lying to him that the medics were coming, that he was going to be fine, watching the light fade from a kid's eyes who'd never even seen his 20th birthday. That's when something changed in McKenna. The manual said 14 more men would probably die taking those 3 pillboxes. The manual was written by officers who did their calculations on paper, not in blood. The manual didn't have to write letters home to mothers explaining their sons died following doctrine. McKenna had remembered something from his artillery training. A lecture most guys slept through. An instructor, Captain Paul Henderson, Kentucky, who'd served in World War I and knew techniques the modern army had mostly forgotten. Ricochet fire. Henderson had been explicit. Gentlemen, the manual covers this because it works. But it works only when conditions are perfect. Get 1 thing wrong, you're wasting ammunition. Get 2 things wrong, you're putting your own men at risk. Get 3 things wrong, you're court-martialed if you survive. McKenna remembered asking, "Sir, when would conditions ever be perfect?" Henderson had smiled. "Son, if you ever find yourself in a situation where conditions are perfect, you're probably already dead. But if you somehow survive long enough to find that perfect geometry, that perfect moment, don't hesitate. Don't second guess. The universe doesn't offer perfect shots twice." November 18th, 06:40 hours. McKenna studies the 3 pillboxes through his binoculars. The fog is starting to lift. That's both good and bad. Good because he can see. Bad because the Germans can see him. The pillboxes are designated Target 47, 48, and 49 on the tactical map, but McKenna thinks of them as Paul, Peter, and Mary. Humanizing the enemy positions helps him think. Paul is closest, about 220 yards out. Peter is 40 yards behind and to the left. Mary is 40 yards behind and to the right, forming a triangle with Paul at the apex. Standard defensive arrangement. Paul covers the approach. Peter and Mary cover Paul's flanks and rear. Attack anyone, you're exposed to the other 2. The ground in front of Paul is frozen solid. McKenna can see frost glittering in the emerging sunlight. The ground slopes slightly downward toward the American positions, maybe 3 degrees. Not much, but enough. He does the math again. Muzzle velocity of the M7 gun, 2,600 feet per second with reduced charge. Distance to target, 220 yards, 660 feet. Time to impact, roughly 0.25 seconds. Ground impact point, 180 feet short of the target. Ricochet angle, if he can hit at 18 degrees, the shell should bounce at approximately 15 degrees off the frozen ground. That's the first bounce. The shell, traveling, at maybe 1/800 feet per second after ground impact, would strike the embrasure of Paul. But here's where it gets interesting. The embrasure isn't perpendicular to the shell's flight path, it's angled. The concrete around the embrasure forms a funnel shape designed to protect the gunner inside while giving him maximum field of fire. If McKenna's calculations are right, the shell won't penetrate the embrasure directly. It'll ricochet off the angled concrete, deflect to the left at approximately 30 degrees, continue on a flat trajectory, now traveling at maybe 1/200 feet per second, and strike the side wall of Peter. The delay fuse, specifically the M54A1 delay fuse set for 0.05 seconds, won't have detonated yet. It's designed to penetrate before exploding. 2 ricochets won't trigger it prematurely. The shell hits Peter's wall, penetrates 18 inches into the concrete, detonates. The explosion, 7.2 pounds of Composition B explosive, creates an overpressure wave inside Peter. But it does something else. The blast projects concrete fragments and shell casing in all directions. Some of that shrapnel will travel laterally through the 10-foot gap between Peter and Mary. Mary's embrasure faces roughly toward Peter. Not directly, but at an angle. If enough shrapnel enters Mary's embrasure, even a few pieces, it creates chaos inside. Maybe kills the gunners, maybe doesn't. But it definitely makes them close. The embrasure shield makes them button up, makes them combat ineffective for critical minutes. That's the theory. 3 pillboxes, 1 shot. But McKenna knows theories and reality rarely match in combat. Still, it's better than the alternative. Better than sending more men to die doing it the book way. Rodriguez watches McKenna calculate. "Sarge, you sure about this?" "No," McKenna says honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if we don't try. Load he, delay fuse, reduced charge. I need minimal power on this shot." Chen moves to the ammunition rack. The M10 carries 54 rounds of 3-inch ammunition. High explosive, armor-piercing smoke, white phosphorus. Chen pulls an M42A1 high explosive shell, a 14-pound projectile with a copper rotating band, and examines the fuse. "This one's got quick fuse, Sarge. We don't have any delay loaded." "Then change the fuse, we've got spares in the rack." "That's gonna take 5 minutes, maybe more. The Germans know we're here." As if to punctuate Chen's point, an MG42 opens up from Paul. Tracers arc over the M10's position. They're firing high deliberately, warning shots. The message is clear. "We see you. Come any closer and we'll cut you down." "Do it fast," McKenna says. The next 4 minutes feel like 4 hours. Chen works with tools that keep slipping in his cold, numbed fingers. The fuse threads have to be precisely aligned. Cross-thread it and the shell won't fire properly, or worse, it might detonate in the barrel. Meanwhile, McKenna watches the clock. It's Oro 6:43. The infantry attack goes at Oro 700. 17 minutes. Rodriguez adjusts the gun elevation. The M10's 3-inch gun can depress to 10 degrees and elevate to plus or 19 degrees. For this shot, McKenna needs about 6 degrees of elevation. Not much, but at this range, 6 degrees is the difference between success and catastrophic failure. "Sarge," Kowalski calls from the driver's position. "We got movement. 2 o'clock. Looks like German infantry." McKenna swings his binoculars right. A squad of German soldiers, maybe 8 men, are moving through the tree line toward the American flank. They haven't spotted the M10 yet, but they will in the next minute or two. This is falling apart. If those Germans spot the M10 before McKenna takes his shot, they'll alert the pillboxes. The surprise is gone. The geometry changes. Everything changes. "Chen, how we doing?" 30 seconds. Threading the fuse now. Rodriguez keeps his hands on the gun controls. "We might want to engage those infantry, Sarge. We fire at them. Every pillbox in this sector knows exactly where we are. We become the priority target. No shot at the bunkers. We don't fire at them. They're gonna hit our flank during the attack." McKenna makes a decision. "Johnson, take your Thompson, get around behind those trees. If they get within 50 yards of our position, open up. Otherwise, let them pass. We need 2 more minutes." Private Johnson, the replacement, the one who'd only been with the crew for 10 hours, grabs his Thompson submachine gun and slips over the side of the M10. The kid moves well, McKenna notes. Stays low, uses cover. Maybe he'll survive longer than Walsh did. Maybe. Fuse set, Chen announces. Loading now. The shell slides into the breach. Chen slams it home, secures the mechanism. Rodriguez lays the gun on target. The crosshairs settle on a patch of frozen ground 180 feet in front of Paul. This is it. McKenna takes a breath. On my command, fire for effect. 0647 hours. The M7 gun roars. 14 pounds of high explosive shell screams downrange at 2,600 feet per second. The gun's recoil rocks the M10 on its suspension. McKenna's already tracking with his binoculars, watching. The shell hits frozen ground exactly 180 feet short of Paul. A geyser of frozen earth explodes upward. The shell ricochets at a flat angle, a blur McKenna can barely track. It strikes Paul's embrasure. The concrete funnel acts exactly as McKenna calculated. The shell deflects left at 30 degrees, continues, on its modified trajectory, and punches into Peter's side wall. The delay fuse works perfectly. The shell penetrates 18 inches into the reinforced concrete before the M54A1 fuse triggers. 7.2 pounds of Composition B explosive detonates inside the wall. The explosion is catastrophic. Not just because it breaches the wall, though it does, but because the overpressure wave inside the confined space is lethal. The pillbox's interior is only about 12 feet by 10 feet. The blast wave bounces off concrete walls, amplifying. Eardrums rupture. Internal organs hemorrhage. The 3 German soldiers inside Peter die instantly. But the explosion does more. The concrete wall shatters. Fragments of concrete, some as large as a fist, spray outward in all directions. So do pieces of the shell casing, superheated to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This secondary fragmentation travels laterally at over 3,000 feet per second. Some of it dissipates into the air. Some of it buries itself in trees. But a significant amount travels the 40-foot gap between Peter and Mary. Mary's embrasure faces at a 45-degree angle toward Peter. Not directly, but close enough. 20 or 30 fragments of concrete and steel enter the 18-inch opening. Inside, 2 German gunners are training their MG-42 on American positions. They never see it coming. The fragmentation doesn't kill them both. One survives with severe wounds to his face and arms, but it incapacitates them completely. The MG-42 falls silent. The surviving gunner collapses, screaming, clutching his ruined face. The blast also does something else. The pressure wave travels through the ground, through the interconnected trenches between pillboxes. It rattles Paul's crew. They feel the explosion. They hear their comrade's death. They know they're next. 4 seconds after McKenna's shell impacts, the crew of Paul abandons their position. 3 German soldiers stumble out of the rear entrance, hands raised, shouting, "Kamerad! Kamerad!" 3 pillboxes. 1 shot. 90 seconds. But McKenna isn't watching the surrendering Germans. He's watching the tree line where 8 German infantry were approaching. Private Johnson hasn't fired. The German squad heard the explosion, saw their pillboxes neutralized, and they're retreating. Smart move. Without the bunkers supporting fire, they're exposed. McKenna keys his radio. Falcon 6, this is Wolverine 2-3. Target complex neutralized. Approach is clear. Repeat. Approach is clear. The company commander's voice crackles back. Wolverine 2-3, say again? All 3 targets? Affirmative, Falcon 6. All 3 targets neutralized with single shell. Pillbox Paul's crew surrendering. Pillbox Peter destroyed. Pillbox Mary combat ineffective. There's a long pause. McKenna can almost hear the captain trying to process what he just heard. How? Never mind. Good shooting, 2-3. Infantry moving up now. At 0700 hours, the 28th Infantry Division's Company C moves forward up the hill. They expect German fire from the pillboxes. They expect casualties. They expect hell. Instead, they find 3 concrete structures, 2 destroyed, 1 abandoned. They find 4 German prisoners, the 3 from Paul and the wounded gunner from Mary. They find clear passage to their objective. Total American casualties for taking 3 fortified pillboxes. 0. Time required 90 seconds. Ammunition expended one 3-inch high explosive shell. But here's what the after-action report doesn't capture. When Company C reaches the ridgeline, when they achieve their objective without losing men to those bunkers, when they look back at the M10 sitting in that firing position, every one of them knows they should be dead. Every one of them knows the math that says 3 fortified positions cost 20 American lives. Every one of them knows McKenna did something that wasn't in any manual. Well, technically it was in the manual, but nobody actually did it. Nobody was crazy enough or desperate enough or brilliant enough to try, except McKenna. Sergeant James McKenna received a Bronze Star for his actions on November 18, 1944. The citation read, "For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against an enemy of the United States." The citation didn't mention ricochet fire. The word ricochet doesn't appear anywhere in the official documentation. The Army didn't want to encourage other tank destroyer crews to attempt similar shots. The official story was that McKenna's crew had executed a technically proficient direct fire mission against fortified enemy positions. But the crews knew. The tankers and tank destroyers who fought in the Hurtgen Forest passed the story around. McKenna's ricochet. It became a legend. Most guys didn't believe it was possible. Physics said it could work, but physics and combat reality were different things. McKenna himself rarely talked about it. Years later, interviewed for a military history project, he was characteristically modest. "I did the math. The math worked. I got lucky. That's all it was, math and luck. But Rodriguez, his gunner, saw it differently. Jimmy wasn't lucky. He saw something nobody else saw. An angle, a possibility. That's not luck. That's genius." The ricochet fire technique never became standard doctrine. It remained in the field manuals, noted as a viable but rarely employed option. The conditions had to be too perfect. The stakes too high. The gunner too skilled. But here's what changed. Tank destroyer crews started studying it. Not to use regularly, nobody was that crazy, but to have in their toolkit for that one moment when conventional approaches wouldn't work. When the math and the terrain and the desperation aligned into something like possibility, McKenna and his crew survived the Hurtgen Forest. All 4 of them made it to Germany's surrender in May 1945. Their M10 took hits, twice from Panzerfausts, once from an 88, but the armor held. The engines kept running and they kept fighting. After the war, McKenna went home to Ohio, married his high school sweetheart, had 3 kids, taught mathematics at a community college for 37 years. He never mentioned his Bronze Star to his students. Most of them had no idea their mild-mannered geometry professor had once calculated a solution to an impossible problem that saved 37 American lives. Rodriguez opened that auto shop in Texas. Chen worked as a civil engineer in San Francisco. Kowalski built engines in Detroit. They stayed in touch. Every year on November 18th, they'd call each other. Remember that day. Remember that shot. Remember the moment when mathematics became magic. The 3 pillboxes, Paul, Peter, and Mary, still stand in what is now the Hurtgen Forest War Cemetery area. The concrete is crumbling now. Trees grow through the ruins, but you can still see the impact points. You can still see Peter's shattered wall, and if you know what you're looking for, if you stand in exactly the right spot at exactly the right angle, you can still see the geometry. The ricochet path. The impossible shot. The day one gunner rewrote the rules of war, not by breaking them, but by remembering a technique everyone else had forgotten, by seeing possibility where others saw only death, by doing math while people shot at him, by taking one perfect shot,